Now, welcome to this first podcast for us at Cheltenham Town. I'm Tim, Academy Manager. I'm here with Dave Palmer, who's our Head of Coaching. Today, we're going to explore Cheltenham Town and how we coach. So, yeah, here with Dave. And I guess our first question, really, just to get us off and just thinking about what does the planning process look like for coaches at Cheltenham Town?
So a massive question that's on the surface of it very simple. In terms of the complexities behind it, perhaps a bit more detail on it. First and foremost, I think the three-step process for anything that happens within academies is like plan, do, and review. So the planning process, the delivery, and then the review of it, which then impacts sort of the following delivery as well. From our perspective, we have a yearly syllabus. This serves as kind of a guide for weekly delivery. The reason for a yearly syllabus is to kind of avoid a scenario where we're reactive and we're planning purely based off a result, a fixture, a performance, but also to ensure that there is a kind of a breadth of delivery across the season so players are exposed to all parts of our syllabus, our curriculum, and kind of the how we play elements within there as well. So from a coach's perspective, for a session, they will be given a theme. That will be the start point for their planning process. From that point on, then it becomes a lot more sort of individualized around what players need. So, an example may be we're doing a finish the attack session, and within there, we've got a centre forward that needs to work on his first time finishing in the green zone. So, that's where then the coach will then plan a practice, a session that will help that player develop his individual bits in line with kind of the overall syllabus in there as well.
And I guess that syllabus there, Dave, that we're talking about, where does that come from? Where's it driven from? I guess over time, as an academy, where's it really come from? And I guess for the guys listening, what is this kind of syllabus content?
It's been an evolution over the last 5 to 10 years, I would say. We're at a point now where it's driven by the how we play stuff and how we envisage a Cheltenham Town team playing. It's now split into kind of three key areas that we work on across the week. So we'd have a tactical session, which is more your team based, how we play game scenario type stuff. We'll have 1v1 elements in there, so individual technical abilities, and then we'll have a combinations sort of bit, which may be in or out of possession. So more working in twos, threes, and fours. So we're at a point now where we can focus on the individual in one session, the unit or the small group in another session, and then the team in the third session to try and drip feed in those key principles that we want.
Amazing. And I guess we talk about that syllabus and how we play, and not to go off topic because I think it is still a core fundamental of how we coach. Does that work across all of the phases?
In terms of having the syllabus, yeah,
Yeah.
it shares massive similarities from FP in the under nines through to the PDP in the under 18s. Everyone will kind of work to a similar syllabus in the sense that if we're on a create the attack week, the under nines are working on it whilst the under 18s are working on it. From a staffing perspective, that allows us to share ideas, that allows us to plan sessions together, but also bounce ideas off each other within that as well to help that planning process even more.
Yeah, I think again with all that golden threads approach for us as an academy is key. I think you mentioned the staff in that in terms of planning, but I think it's great for players as well if they're playing across. They understand that kind of I guess vocab, some of the what's expected of them in their role, and yeah, I can only emphasise that I guess that importance of the how we play, how we coach, that kind of knitted together approach has to exist. Just on this, I guess talking maybe a little bit more about the holistic side of the planning in that syllabus. So we went and talked about the physical, the psychological stuff. How does that kind of knit in nicely with that session?
So again, across the week, we've got physical parameters that we try to hit within different sessions. It lends itself quite nicely in terms of when we have a 1v1 session, focus around agility, acceleration, because it's likely to be tighter spaces, tighter areas, through to kind of tactical stuff, which will be more speed-based endurance for the older ones when working across bigger spaces. From a coach's perspective, we're supported by the S&C coach and the physical department here at the club in terms of recommendations on pitch sizes for SSGs, small sided games for anyone that isn't on the acronyms, how many reps, how long the rest is, how long the work should be, so on and so forth, so that we can best support players in that physical development as well. So that's something that is planned in across the week and is not sort of by accident in terms of what a warm up might look like on a Monday might look different to a warm up on a Friday because of the physical sort of outcomes that we want from the session. From a psychological perspective, it's done more on a block. So across the blocks over the season, so we work in 6-week blocks, there will be a specific psychological sort of focus that we want on it. Take the current point of the season we're in the first block, it's around developing players' confidence. So a lot of bits that we will plan into sessions will be around helping players recognise what they do when they're playing at their best, challenging them and helping them to see progress within their own sort of abilities. And that will then span across the 6 weeks. The good bit then for us as coaches is we can kind of develop that story and that narrative over the 6 week block, and players may look back at, say, Dartfish week 1 clips compared to Dartfish week 6 clips and see their progress, and that's knitted in within it, as well as kind of perhaps some of the games that we might go after. So it may again enable us in the block around confidence, some green games where we are able to perform well, where lads are able to spend periods on the ball and doing well and building that self-esteem and bits like that. When we come and talk about sort of emotional control and resilience, that may be where we try and load the block with some more red games where they're going to be right up against it and they're going to be challenged more in that sort of sense.
No, amazing. Just one point, probably within our plan do review. Obviously, we've got, I think like 19 coaches at one time working on the grass across all the age groups, and then we've got some, obviously, the MDT there as well at times. So we talk about pack coaching. Some people might hear that as cell coaching at other clubs, but for us, what is that pack coaching? What's its purpose? How do we deploy it? When is it at its best?
So I guess in its simplest form, pack coaching is making the best use of 2, 3, 4 coaches in a session to best support the individual needs. I think we're in a good place now where we've moved far away from one coach delivers a session whilst one picks up cones, which is perhaps a more traditional way of looking at it. From our perspective, there's multiple ways in which we can pack coach. Perhaps some of the most common ones that we'll use is a split session, in the sense of one coach has a lead responsibility for planning and delivering part of a session, whilst the other coach supports individuals within that. And then that flips for the second half of a session. Other bits, particularly like on a tactical night, great opportunities where one coach might work with an in possession team, one coach works in opposition against that as an out of possession team. So it might be that you set up in a formation that we know we might see or that we've struggled to play against a front three, for example, and we'll set some of that up in training. One coach working with each team so that there's support within there. Where we're lucky enough to have more than 2 in a session, that's where we can really delve into some of these individual learning plans, because it may be that one coach is, for a 20-minute practice, is positioned with one player or 2 players to support them and guide, challenge, give information, etc., sort of as and when is needed for that player. So again, from our perspective, those individual learning plans plus pack coach equals great opportunities for some individuals within perhaps a whole session, but also within a finishing practice, within a small-sided game where they get the guidance that they need in there as well.
Amazing. I think that brings us on. I know we talked about several different things there, and I think we'll probably end up talking about some of that again in different, slightly different lenses. But I guess that next evolution in this conversation is to talk about what does a typical session look like. I think we talked about a lot of building blocks there, but what would a session from start to finish look like or should feel like for a Cheltenham Town player and obviously a Cheltenham Town coach?
So again, there'll be some variety across the week, but largely follows a similar structure. So as we said, we've got a 1v1, a combinations, and kind of more of a tactical night as well within there. The structure within that should be fairly similar in that it's an arrival activity for the boys as and when they get to training. So something that engages early, something that is fun, enjoyable, pick up games into a warm up that will have specific physical outcomes that we're looking for in that session for that week, then into a finishing session, and then on to kind of the session theme, if you like. Now, that can be a lead-in practice into a small-sided game. It may be that it's small-sided games throughout. That's kind of the typical structure that we would see in each Cheltenham Town session.
So you mentioned those kind of themes, and I guess that links back to the how we play. In terms of that how we play, could you give some examples of maybe some themes you'd expect to see from our philosophy, the way we play in just some broad titles?
Yeah, so an example on the tactical nights, it's across the 6 weeks. We have 2 sessions on create and maintain the attack. So that's our principles of how generally we play in our half to try and beat the press. We've got elements of finish the attack. So again, in the final third in the attacking half, what does it look like to create and score goals? And then we flip that on the out of possession stuff in terms of a high press, what it looks like defending in the attacking third, how we might defend the middle third, and then how we defend the goal. So across a 6 week block, there'll be a session for each of those that the lads will be exposed to.
Sounds, as we know, pretty deep thinking, and there's a lot going on in that. I guess what's that underpinning kind of learning strategies or philosophies that we're trying to put in place so it becomes quite consistent? What's our underpinning coaching philosophy? I guess is probably a nice way of putting it.
So, from our perspective, in terms of key theories that we try and base our coaching philosophy on around situated learning theory, and for us, that in its simplest form is trying to provide our players with scenarios, with learning opportunities that are relevant and authentic to what the game of football looks like. So, situated learning theory would suggest that anything that has the cues and the triggers that the game looks like helps me understand and learn what I'm going to do. Because when I then try and apply it into the match, those cues and those triggers are there as well. So, from our perspective, that's something that guides a lot of the design of our sessions in terms of use of small sided games, use of competition, use of opposition, rather than unopposed type work, because we want the lads to be able to do it with pressure. We want them to be able to do it in match realistic situations. In terms of the players themselves and in theories of motivation, self determination theory shapes a lot of what we do. Within that, one of the key ones being around sort of autonomy, that feeling for the boys that they have a voice, that feeling for the boys that they are able to make decisions. And again, within our coaching philosophy, important that the boys are able to explore and trial ideas that they have. Not going to get it right first time, and it's not the job of the coach to give them the answer first time either. But this sense where players are able to have that autonomy and are able to sort of shape their own learning experiences, the evidence suggests that long term motivation to continue in those environments is heightened. And from our perspective, professional footballers is a success. Lads still playing football when they're 35 and still loving the game, or perhaps moving into coaching, etc., is also a massive success for us. And trying to drive that motivation long term is a key part of what we do when they're starting out with us in the pre academy, and equally when they're with us on scholarships and looking for pro contracts.
Nice. I guess something that you massively championed the last probably 5, 6 years is this thing around finishing blocks in every single session. I guess the big question there is why.
I guess the easiest answer, it's practicing the critical moments of the game. Perhaps the hardest thing to do, put the ball in the back of the net. If you're a defender, one of your biggest most important jobs is to keep the ball out of the net. So from our perspective, it started off with sort of having a look at chances that we were creating against sort of goals we were scoring, and there was a lot of chance creation. We weren't converting as many of those opportunities. So from our perspective, it was that how do we give the lads the skill set to essentially score more goals? So it came about from that, and now it's part of the weekly syllabus where it's a 20-minute block in every session where we will practice these critical moments of the game. Now, as you get older and it becomes more position specific, that does mean centre forwards practicing their finishing. The flip of that is we get goalkeepers and centre backs getting huge repetition of defending their goal moments. And I think, again, when you start to watch Cheltenham Town teams now through the academy, you'll see the defensive behaviours that also come out of those finishing blocks as well.
Nice. We've touched a lot and we started to talk about the games a little bit there in terms of matches, the red, amber, green.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what's the purpose of our tournament week and competition week? And then I guess you can start to then look around maybe that start to talk around the match day kind of stuff. But if you go off first of all around that purpose of the tournament week, week 7 as we call it,
Mm-hmm.
what's its purpose?
So, first and foremost, the purpose of a tournament and competition week is opportunity for the lads to compete with each other. that those psychological challenges, if you will, around winning and losing, but doing it in a way that still fits our philosophy. So still playing to the way that we want to play, but that element of playing to win, because again, we're not going to shy away from talking about football being a competitive game, and every time our lads play, they play to win. So we want to foster that kind of environment.
It kind of links, doesn't it, back to the self-determination theory that we're talking about, I
Mhm.
guess, and contextualizing that, holding that. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's again that the sense of competence, I guess, that comes from competing and winning, that can develop that self-esteem, that can develop players' confidence. But let's not shy away from the bits. There is going to be challenges within this where I might lose 3 tournament weeks in a row. And actually, then we start to talk about our psychological sort of curriculum, then in terms of resilience and emotional control and goal setting. Well, what do we need to make better so that I can compete the next time we do this? From our perspective, that's one massive part of it. The other part of it is what's the most enjoyable part of the game, and that's playing the game.
Yeah.
So from our boys who now some of them are in 4 or 5 times a week, we've got to remember that it's an enjoyable experience for them. We've got to remember that they might be doing this for the next 30 years. So from our perspective, the enjoyment is a massive bonus in terms of those tournament weeks as well. From a coaching perspective, it gives a good opportunity to kind of step back from having to worry about kind of your practice design, sizes, shapes, whether the game's right, etc., and actually just be able to delve into some of those individual learning plans with players, because in essence they're just playing the game, and therefore it might give me a great opportunity to work with a centre midfielder around receiving priorities, how he might receive beyond press, and so on and so forth.
Amazing. I think we're starting to touch now on, again going towards that match day fixture as we traditionally talk about it. And I guess I think our program's grown and grown in terms of the number of games, and I think you'll probably touch on the number of games that even in YDP, FP, all the phases are playing now. I guess how are we approaching match days as coaching staff, and what is the purpose of the coach on a match day, and how do they plan?
So from a coaching perspective, the match day should look similar to a coaching day, a training day. Players will, well, teams will be given a team challenge that is linked to the weekly syllabus. So we'll link to practice that has gone on in the week. They'll also then be provided with sort of individual learning objectives within that as well. So very similar in terms of how we would try to deliver a session, in that there are team, there's unit, there's individual challenges. From a coach's perspective, then the challenge then to see what that random environment of the game gives the players. Within training, it's much more predictable, I guess is the right way to describe it, in terms of what you're going to come up against, what you're going to see, because it's pre-planned. We don't necessarily always know what we're going to get when we play other clubs. So, from a coaching perspective, then it's that challenge of firstly recognizing when players need support, then what support they need, and then recognizing when to give it to them. It would perhaps sometimes be quite easy for coaches to stand on the sideline and go, I've recognized what this 10-year-old hasn't, so I'm going to give them the solution. But again, from our perspective, the problem solving and finding solutions is a massive part of what a skill set that we want our players to have. So even as parents, you might spot on the sideline, I know what's going wrong here, but the coach hasn't fixed it. And that likely is a very deliberate ploy from coaches to go, I'm going to give the players time to try to solve it. Our challenge will be to recognise, look, when do I need to guide or support or push them towards a certain solution more? And sometimes when do I need to tell them? There will be times when we're in what we would term as a red game, so one where we're right up against it, where the players might need the solutions earlier, because the knock-on effect of going for 8, 10, 12 nil down on the self-esteem and confidence might be irreversible in that moment. So it's a big challenge for the coaches, and you will see times where we'll stand back and we'll be quiet and we'll leave them to it. And you'll see times where coaches will drive performance more, because that might be what the players need in that moment.
Brilliant, Dave. And I guess how do we support players to understand the how we play philosophy?
First bit is around shared vocabulary that we've got. So the idea being that when we start to talk about green zones and sliders and getting a, getting across the front post and recovering inside your post, players understand what that means, because it's shared vocabulary from under nines through to under 18s. It's not a case of them having to learn a new philosophy every year. It's not a case of them having to learn everything new. There will be bits that start to drip feed in across the years. So there won't be the breadth of it at under nines that there will be at under 18s. But there's not going to be anything that the same thing has a different meaning, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
That is consistent in that sense, that we help players to understand how we play through those sort of trigger words and cue words, and that's then further supported through the analysis sessions that we do with them, whether that's the group ones, individual ones, or whether that's opportunities for players to watch themselves back on Dartfish, and then it's a check in with the coach. Because again, that shared vocabulary plus those opportunities to review and reflect on it are are, are useful for the lads, because they'll learn something, forget it, relearn it, forget it, and that's the kind of the powerful bit in the learning. Then that when we keep revisiting those bits, that's when it's more likely to stick in the long term. The other tool then, which I'm sure everybody loves, is the PMA. Again, a useful tool, firstly for players to reflect on their own performance.
Yeah.
A really useful skill for whatever they end up doing in life, being able to identify what went well, even better if, what would I change for next time. That's then supported by the coaches in terms of the feedback that we give, that in terms of the knowledge that coaches possess, that might be able to add some detail to the players' reflections, or might be able to help identify something that the players not yet spotted themselves.
So it probably brings us on to our very last question, which probably starts to talk about the individual players a little bit more. As we all know, in this modern day, we're trying to support the late developers as well as making sure that those that are developing early also are challenged as required, so they get the skill sets to hopefully drive towards becoming a professional footballer. So how do we support players who are early or late developers at Cheltenham Town?
In several ways. Ones that I think will be more obvious, more overt, that you'll pick up and see quite easily, and then other bits that go on within there that maybe not quite so obvious. So, firstly, there's the kind of the cross age training and games. So some players will be challenged by playing across with older players. Generally, that provides a physical challenge for an early, biologically sort of physically matured player, or playing across with younger age groups for those ones who are still waiting for first growth spurt, or those ones who've been through growth spurt perhaps and are still finding their legs because
Some of us are still growing, Dave. Yeah.
I hope not. I hope not. So yeah, there's that one which I think would probably be seen more obviously and tends to deal with the more physical side of things. From our perspective, and something that we've run for a few years that maybe doesn't happen at all clubs, is our pathway program. So we're looking here not necessarily just at physical development, but at those players who are early technical, tactical developers who might need a different stimulus, who might need a different challenge within their training and within their games program. Then flip that again, players within their own age groups. Part of our games program will be that we try and make sure that we play varied formats. 11v11 is not a one size fits all for everybody, same as 7v7 isn't a one size fits all for the under nines. There'll be players who are earlier physical developers who 7v7 at nines will suit, and they'll be able to use their super strength, pace, power, etc. over the bigger distances. However, someone who's a later developer who might be more technical at the moment might thrive in the 4v4, 5v5 environment. So, from our perspective, that's something that we try and do right the way across the academy in terms of those varied formats. For one reason being these earlier and later sort of developers within there to perform in those different environments. And then probably the least obvious one might be sort of pairings within sessions. So, from our perspective, if we've got two centre midfielders, for example, who are high performing at the moment, we might match them up against each other in a session, because the natural sort of environment that they're in that session means I have to compete against somebody who is also high performing. We might flip that and put high performing centre forward against high performing centre back. We might go, well, actually, we've got a left back who needs to learn how to deal or defend against pace. So we'll put him up against the quickest player. And that might be bits that we do that you might not, it might not be as obvious from the outside, because it is just, well, they're just playing a game here. But from our perspective, that pre planning of it might almost give us 90% of the learning sort of stimulus that we need for that session.
Dave, thank you for kind of giving up your time today to go through that. I think for everyone listening, you can start to understand the complex nature of how we coach and how these different building blocks come together to make a real holistic program for our young boys within the academy, and that they grow within the academy over time, building up these varied skills, some quite deliberate, some quite refined, some quite broad in terms of the holistic program. And as always, if there's questions from the outside, always ask away. But hopefully, it's been insightful. You've learned something new because it's not always obvious. Maybe when you're looking out to the in terms of what's going on. So thank you, Dave, for giving us a real insight into how we work. I think this acts as a great platform for us to continue to have communication with all our stakeholders, whether you're an internal or an external, whether you're a parent, whether you're a guardian, whether you're another club, even listening to what we're about. I think I think we can be very proud of the work that we're doing, and hopefully we will continue to do over this season and far into the future. So, Dave, thanks for your time, and
Thank you.
thank you for listening, everyone.